Hello, my name is Simeon Smaill and I'm from Scion. Today I will be presenting some recent research from the accelerator trial series and the mid-rotation trial series. The accelerator trial series. This is a series of trials, 6 of them set up around New Zealand, with the intent of understanding what are the limitations to productivity at these sites and how can we get through those until we reach the physiological maximum of what we can do, what we can achieve with pilot radiator at these sites. Now, we have a number of elements in these trials, including variations in the genetics of the trees, looking at different levels of fertilizer application, but we also are looking at novel biostimulant products. We've integrated nursery management and looking for nursery legacy effects into the trees during their production. We're looking at the effects of site establishment and other physical site management practices. We're looking at the soil microbial community that's present at these sites and how it responds to the treatments. We're also looking at silviculture, for example, variations in stocking regime. We have a climatic gradient across the sites, so that gives us the opportunity to look at things around drought tolerance. And we're also bringing to bear the latest modeling and the latest remote sensing technologies as well, so that we can really understand what's going on these sites, how are they responding, and how can we get more out of them. So now we're just going to talk about some results from the Southern Kangaroo Accelerator Trial, which is the oldest trial. It was established in 2015. Now, we've characterized the site as being lacking in nitrogen, particularly in terms of an organic matter pool. What our target is for this site is to increase the size of the organic matter nutrient pool to improve the current crop, but also to improve the site for future rotations as well. And what we've done with New Barn is that we've identified that if we want to reach our productivity target, we need to get an extra 500 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare into this forest. To date, we've added 20 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare as bioret, and we've compared that to 100 kilograms of nitrogen per hectare added as urea. The bioret has been added in 3 applications to date, to total that 20 kilograms of nitrogen, whereas the urea has been added in 2 additions of 50 kilograms per hectare. Now, in terms of the growth that we've seen from this, we have significant gains in DBH. Again, you can clearly see that the urea treatment has outperformed the bioret treatment, but since we've added 5 times as much nitrogen, that's to be expected. But the relative gain, we see the difference isn't 5 times as much. So we think bioret is performing reasonably well here. In terms of foliar nutrition, again, almost the same response, where urea has produced the greatest increase in foliar nitrogen concentrations. But when we look at phosphorus, we're really seeing a dilution effect come through, that basically the foliar nitrogen is basically diluting out the foliar phosphorus as the tree needle mass increases. Interestingly enough, we're not seeing that same dilution effect to the same extent with bioret, but we will keep monitoring this one through time. Now, looking at Rangipo. Rangipo is a different kind of site. It's actually a relatively fertile ex-farm site. So the opportunity that we looked at here was, well, how can we get the best possible out of this relatively fertile site? So we looked at the site preparation techniques that were going to be applied and also stocking rates. Now, the conventional treatment for this site would have been to rip it and to stock it at 833 stems per hectare. So we have a no ripping treatment as a comparison, and we also have treatment plots that are stocked at 1282 stems per hectare. So about 450 stems per hectare difference there. Now, in terms of our initial results, given that this trial was established in 2016, we're seeing a very strong negative effect from the ripping treatment. So that conventional practice is being outperformed by not ripping, just by planting into the pasture as it was. And curiously, we're also seeing on an individual tree basis, the trees have performed better under the high stocking regime than the low stocking regime. In terms of foliar nitrogen, we're also seeing significant differences that are pretty much the same, that the ripping treatment is being outperformed by the no rip treatment, and high stocking is better than low stocking, and this continues for foliar phosphorus as well. Now, in terms of the explanation for these outcomes, we think that the ripping treatment created a lot of opportunity for weeds to come through. So there was a lot of early competition, but it also seems to potentially have disrupted soil processes. So we're in the process of looking at some of those responses. So While we understand that ripping is absolutely vital in some places simply for frost protection to get the tree crop when they're young up off the ground a little bit, where you can avoid ripping in afforestation practices, this is a pretty clear result that you should perhaps try to avoid it, simply because of the productivity gain that you could get in that early phase. With regard to the differences between the high stock and the low stock trials, we don't have a clear explanation for that, but one possibility is that the high stocking plots, they're totally dominated by radiata pine, whereas in the low stocking plots, there's still some pasture, some weeds, some other plants coming through. So our working theory here is that under the high stocking plant, the soil microbe environment and the soil microbes themselves have shifted over entirely to supporting Pinus radiata. That's really all that they're doing, that's what they're looking after. Whereas in the low stocking regime, you've still got a transition. So the system potentially isn't as efficient because it's looking to support a wider range of plants. So that's our theory, and we're going to do some testing to figure it out. But as it stands right now, the higher stocking treatment is certainly delivering bigger and better individual plants. Now, the other element that we can look at is comparing the stock types. And when I say stock types, I'm talking about the different genetics that we've planted out. And I'm calling them stock types rather than clones, simply because we have 10 clones, we have the attenuata hybrid, but we also have GF19 seedlings that we've planted out at each trial as well. So now we're just going to focus on the first 3 sites, the oldest 3. And they have 11 out of 12 stock types in common, so it's almost the same thing. But what stood out immediately is that the same clone is the best across all 3 sites, clone 31. And at the other end of the scale, the attenuata hybrid and clone 37 are also consistently the worst genetics. So this suggests that, well, this was initially a bit of a surprise to us. We thought there'd be a little bit more variation given the difference between southern kangaroo and Rangipo. And indeed, there is some variation. For example, if you look at GF19, you can see that its relative position has changed from site to site, but we still have this one dominant good performer and these 2 consistent poor performers. Realistically, these sites are very close together geographically, so the climatic conditions, if that's particularly powerful, looks to be potentially the driving force of success here. Looking at the next two youngest sites, both established in 2017, these have 8 out of 12 stock types in common with the oldest 3 sites, and these 2 sites are Tairua and Ashley. And immediately we saw some substantial differences to the oldest 3 sites. And for example, the attenuata hybrid is the second best tree at both sites, whereas at Tairua, clone 37, which was one of the 2 worst performers along with the attenuata clone, these are now the 2 best performers. However, at Ashley, it is worth knowing that clone 37 is back down in the lower ranks. This suggests that there's a real opportunities for matching the genetics to your site. The limitations can be better overcome by some genetics than others, and there's a real opportunity for interaction here. GF19, again, showed the potential for variation. It was in the top third at Tairua and the bottom third at Ashley. Understanding where and how GF19 responds, we can see it does have a high degree of site specificity. Some consistent, strong performers, clone 31, and unfortunately, clone 31 was not available when we established these sites. It would have been great to have it to see where it ranked relative to the attenuata at Tairua and Ashley. However, what we do have is a situation that we can go and we can explore the drivers. Why is the attenuata doing well here? Why is clone 37 doing well at Tairua? If we can understand those drivers, we have the opportunity to exploit them as well. So we can utilize them to understand how we can get the clones that we want doing well in the situations that we should be planting them in. But unfortunately, not everything has gone quite to plan. The Tokoiti site, established in 2018, was set up with 3 levels of cultivation. So we basically mulched the original organic matter that was there from the previous harvest and integrated into the soil. And the intent was to increase the moisture holding capacity of this soil. We've dug soil pits post-treatment, and we have seen that we've pulled that organic matter layer deeper. So we've gone from about 30 centimeters to around about 45 centimeters, where we've got a good organic horizon. However, the treatment has also had some negative initial impacts on the radiata crop that we've planted across this site. So that's the levels of mulching. It is noticeable that the growth decrease. So what we want to do is develop a plan to get the stock over this hurdle, because the intention of this treatment is to provide the trees with more water when they are considerably older. So we do want to offset any initial negative effects. So overall, there's considerable scope for added value beyond what we're actually what the intended function of these trials were. The scale and the depth of the data makes them useful for other research, such as the development of remote sensing technologies to remotely characterize foliar properties, simply because the wealth of data we have means we can ground truth those remote observations. And we're also integrating the Ashley site into the Forest Flows MBAE program, and that dovetails perfectly with the drought tolerance work. And now I'd like to move on to the mid-rotation trial series. We have a network of 9 field sites established in 2016 to 17, and they've had treatments in place that include site-specific nutrient balance mixtures, conventional urea, and also foliar application at 7 of the sites as well, using fractions of the dose rates applied to soil. If you consider the nitrogen requirements for a crop, what we've done is using NewBalm and other simulation tools. We've seen if your red line is the current growth, well, what's your nitrogen demand going to be if you push your productivity gain to 20% or 40%? What's the gap that you've got to close? And it shows that you've got to get more nitrogen into the system early on in order to put yourself on that high productivity trajectory. And that's marked up by looking at the annual change in nitrogen demand. So you can see from age about 4 to 10, that's when that peak window sits. And that's really good information to design a nitrogen strategy. But what else might you need beyond nitrogen? So using a study of a range of trial sites where we think we have good and optimal growth, we've looked at the relative ratio between nitrogen and other key elements such as phosphorus and magnesium. And we've done work to understand that if you're going to add this much nitrogen to the system, you're going to need to add this much phosphorus and this much magnesium. Otherwise, you'll simply remove a nitrogen limitation and run into the next limitation, and you still won't be maximizing growth. So this nitrogen quantity that you're adding determines the mass that you need of the other elements as well. And you can see how that's worked in the next slide, where we compare control versus urea treatments versus a site-specific mixture, which is nitrogen and other elements. And that's been our best performer, and overall addressing this deficiencies this way provided a 0.75% volume gain per year relative to the controls, which did outperform the urea mixture. Considering the foliar spray treatment, we have had positive responses to phosphorus applications through foliar spray, and it's very low rates, 0.45 kilograms per hectare. But we do see negative initial responses to foliar nitrogen and N plus P application. Admittedly, it is looking better for N plus P over time. And that's indicated by the fact that those trajectories have dropped below the control line. Now, we've looked at what could be driving this negative response, and we think we can understand it through climatic pressure. The nitrogen addition increased the size of the needle mass quite significantly. And unfortunately, we had 2 periods of drought, and the trees that had that bigger foliar mass suffered more. So therefore, their growth rate has proportionally diminished more. However, this is still good understanding, and it does allow us to maybe target this foliar application technology to specific areas. And we're also looking at the potential to include microelements in another foliar spray that's quite commonplace, which is the Dothostroma copper formulation. Just as much as you could, if you're adding copper, there is the opportunity to add other microelements as well. Overall, there are a lot of opportunities in this space. We've got increasing stock rates and seed lots, such as we talked about in the accelerator trial series. It will be placing greater demands on site resources. So we do need to develop these opportunities with industry so that we can get the most out of a site as it grows, as it wants to take more from the site. And the work we've shown that the best time to do that is that age 4 to 10 window. The operational testing of the balanced fertilizer mix does look promising for lifting growth across sites by factoring in the specific demands of those sites. And overall, that 0.75% gain in volume through to harvest could be quite significant. Now, the oldest trials in this series are now 19 years old. That's still a lot of potential growth for them to be augmented through this fertilizer addition. So we will continue to track these to see the extent of the gain. Well, thank you very much for your attention.